If you're new to vegetable gardening or just haven't ever grown tomatoes before, I definitely recommend you pick up some transplants here at North Haven this spring. They're one of the highest yielding plants that we as gardeners can grow, making them very affordable, and the possibilities in the kitchen are endless. Tomatoes have a reputation of being very finicky to grow, but the garden advisors here at North Haven can equip you with the right knowledge and tools in order to ensure a very abundant harvest. Shopping for tomato plants can be quite overwhelming, especially for beginners, so I want to go over some of the terms that you'll encounter while choosing a plant for your garden. So one of the first things you'll notice is that tomatoes are either hybrid or heirloom. A hybrid is a plant that was crossbred from two different varieties of tomatoes to achieve a desired effect, such as increased disease resistance or increased heat tolerance. When we're talking about heirloom tomato plants, we're really just talking about how long a specific variety has been on the market. It doesn't mean that the plant wasn't ever hybridized, it just means that it stayed the same for quite some time. The fruits of an heirloom tomato plant tend to be a little bit more interesting, colorful, more flavorful, but they don't seem to have the disease resistance and heat tolerance of a hybrid. Another way we classify tomatoes is based on the timing of their harvest. Determinate plants tend to be bush-type tomatoes that get to full size. They set all of their flowers, set all of their fruit all at once in a predetermined time. The tomatoes also typically are larger tomatoes, good for slicing for sandwiches and hamburgers and things like that. Indeterminate tomatoes, however, are considered to be a vining type tomato, meaning that they will just continue to grow, and as they grow, they will continue to produce flowers and set fruit continuously. The tomatoes on an indeterminate plant typically are smaller. Think of cherry tomatoes, things like that. Very good for eating raw and snacking. When growing tomatoes, keep in mind that they are very sun-loving, very thirsty, very heavy-feeding plants, especially when producing fruit. So keep that in mind when you're picking out a location to plant your tomato. Let's talk about some of our more popular varieties that we sell here. This is a Super Sweet 100. This is one of my personal favorites. It's going to be an indeterminate hybridized tomato. This produces small bite-sized fruits, good for eating whole or popping into a salad cut in half. Very sweet, very easy to grow tomatoes. Now do bear in mind, this is gonna get pretty large on you by the end of the season because it is an indeterminate variety. This is another popular one here. This is called Tycoon. This is more of a slicing tomato. You're gonna expect about a baseball-sized tomato from this guy. Again, it is going to be a determinate type, being a larger fruit like that, but it is a hybrid, so you do get that increased disease resistance as well as heat tolerance. A good, reliable producer of larger tomatoes, which can be difficult here in North Texas. This is my personal favorite. This is Cherokee Purple. It is an heirloom variety, and it is a determinate variety. So you are gonna get a large fruit that typically all set around the same time. Very sweet, flavorful tomatoes, very pretty deep purple flesh to them. Now, the fact that they are an heirloom is going to mean that they may be a little bit more sensitive to disease pressure and the heat. So just bear that in mind if you decide to go with this variety. So as we talked about earlier, tomatoes can be quite heavy feeders, meaning that they typically need additional nutrition in the form of fertilizers. This is Tomato Tone by Espoma. It's a good organic, granular, slow release fertilizer that I really like. It's specified for tomatoes because it has calcium and magnesium added to it, which is especially important for the production of fruit on a tomato. So in between my feedings of Tomato Tone, I really like to use Garrett juice, especially when the plant starts to go into fruit production. Like we said earlier, tomatoes are heavy feeders, so any additional boost of nutrition is never going to be a bad idea. The fact that this is a liquid fertilizer means that it's very readily taken up by the plant very quickly. So as soon as your tomatoes start to produce fruit, go ahead and do this about every week. Every 2 weeks is also okay, in between your Tomato Tone. It will really result in an abundant harvest. So nobody likes to talk about pests or diseases in the garden, but it is important to know how to deal with them if they become present. One of the main enemies of the tomato plant is going to be the tomato hornworm. This is basically just a very large caterpillar. And this is a product called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. And the active ingredient in it is going to be a bacteria known as spinosad. What spinosad does, it's a parasitic bacteria, very organic. And when the caterpillar consumes it, it cramps their stomach up and they're no longer able to feed. This is going to be very important because one tomato hornworm can devour a plant pretty quickly, and nobody wants that. So as far as diseases go, our hot, humid growing season here in North Texas makes tomato plants especially vulnerable to fungal diseases such as leaf mildew, as well as blight. This is copper fungicide. This is an effective means of controlling that. The best method though, however, is to continually observe your garden and remove any diseased foliage as soon as possible. So if you've decided to grow tomatoes, I would definitely recommend taking a tomato cage home with your baby transplants. If not, you'll be very disappointed and frustrated by trying to manage this very large plant in your garden that has lots of heavy fruit on it. The heavy gauge wire on this is going to be great to help support those heavy branches. They can lean on these horizontal supports as well as you can tie them to the vertical supports. It really makes a difference when it comes to keeping a tomato plant contained and avoiding snapping branches from the weight of the heavy fruit. We've covered the basics of growing tomatoes, but there's still a lot to learn. There are garden advisors able to assist you with specific questions, and there's also a variety of classes that will be going on throughout the season, so be sure to check those out online. As well as we have tomato project lists that you can either pick up in store, and they're available on our website as well. Thank you.